I overheard her say, "He'll sign the loan. He always does." And in that moment, something inside me finally went still. Not angry, not shocked, just still, like the last piece of a puzzle sliding into place, revealing the picture I had been trying, and failing, to ignore. The voice was unmistakably Mia's, bright, confident, the same voice that used to whisper late-night assurances that we were building something real. But this time it carried a different tone. Calculated, certain, and worst of all, casual. As if my trust was something she could budget around. As if my support was a guarantee, not a choice. I didn't interrupt. I didn't walk into the hallway, where she stood talking to someone on the phone. I stayed hidden in the kitchen, my hand resting on the sink, breathing slowly, letting each word shape the new reality I was stepping into. She laughed softly, adding, "No, really. He never even reads the details. He just wants to help. It'll be in his name, but come on. A business loan is nothing to him." A pause. Then, once everything's settled with the move, it'll all make sense. The move. The word hit harder than anything else, not because she hadn't mentioned it, but because she had. Just not the real version. 2 weeks earlier, she told me her rent was getting too high. Completely understandable. Prices had shot up everywhere. I'd assumed she was venting or preparing to negotiate with her landlord. But then she started offering solutions that made less and less sense. "Maybe I should live with roommates again," she said one night while scrolling through listings. "People are doing it well into their 30s. It's practical." I nodded, supportive. "If that helps relieve stress, I get it." Then, quietly, carefully, she tested the boundary. I could move in with a coworker. He has an extra room, and the rent is way lower. A he, not a she. Not friends. Not someone from college. A coworker. I didn't react. I just asked, "Who is he?" She brushed it off with a playful shrug. "Just someone from my team. He's logical. Practical. He said he liked structure, so it would be easy." Easy. The word felt intentional. When I didn't explode, when I didn't accuse, when I didn't even defend myself, she seemed relieved, almost triumphant. She kissed my cheek lightly, as if rewarding me for being reasonable. But the signs started stacking up quickly after that. She stopped asking me to come over. She stopped leaving her phone face up. She started talking about being more independent, as if independence meant building a new life in another man's apartment while still keeping me around to stabilize her finances. The shift wasn't loud. It was quiet, subtle, like a door slowly closing while you're distracted. And I, admittedly, had been distracted by work, by trust, by the belief that relationships don't fall apart overnight. But slowly, painfully, I began to see what she was doing. The new roommate wasn't a roommate. The business she wanted to start wasn't ready. The loan she said she would help repay was designed to be entirely on me. She had been courting 2 lives at once, one built on my reliability, and the other built on someone else's attention. And she thought she was clever enough to keep the world separate until everything aligned. I learned the full truth by mistake, or rather, by instinct. She asked me one evening to take a look at some documents related to her business idea, a boutique creative studio she'd been dreaming about for years. I smiled, sat down, and opened her laptop while she made tea. She said she needed my calm, analytical mind to help her review the forms. But the documents were empty. Template files. Placeholders. The real folder was hidden behind an innocuous name, Utilities. Inside it I found drafts. Real ones. Signed, dated, rehearsed emails to lenders describing herself as the primary visionary backed by a silent financial partner. The silent partner was me. And in every draft, she wrote my boyfriend, followed immediately by phrasing that implied I was already on board, that I was enthusiastic, that this was our shared dream. The word silent stung more than I expected, but what struck me hardest wasn't the assumption I would help. It was the way she talked about me, as if I were an appliance that dispensed security, as if I were a mechanism rather than a man. Still, I didn't confront her. Not then. Not even when she came back into the room and kissed me while I stared at the monitor, the cursor blinking over the sentence. He thinks this is for his future too, so he'll sign whatever's needed. That's what made me sit back in my chair and truly see her. Not the woman I loved, the woman she was choosing to be. In the days that followed, she grew bolder in her detachment. She spent every evening preparing the move. She used me as a sounding board for financial decisions she had no intention of letting me control. And she lit up, visibly, when she talked about the co-worker. Not his name, not his personality, but his apartment, his organization, his predictable rent, his supportive energy. She was rewriting her life in real time, and she thought I wouldn't notice because she believed a calm man is a blind man. And maybe I would have stayed calm forever, if not for the phone call I overheard that morning. He'll sign the loan. He always does. He always does. Not because he wants to, not because he dreams with her, but because she considered it a pattern she could rely on. I stepped back from the kitchen sink, slow and quiet, letting each word settle like dust on a surface I was finally looking at under direct light. When she ended the call and walked into the kitchen smiling as if nothing had happened, I watched her with a strange, serene clarity. She didn't know what I'd heard. She didn't know the spell had broken. She didn't know I had finally understood my role. Or rather, the role she cast me in. The supportive placeholder. The dependable financier. The stepping stone toward the life she wanted with someone else. She thought she still had control. She thought space meant she could drift away without consequences. She thought I would follow the same pattern, and I let her think that, because the truth had clicked into place so softly that my heartbeat didn't even change. That was the moment the shift happened inside me. The quiet one, the decisive one. I didn't rage. I didn't accuse. I didn't demand explanations. I simply stopped being the person she counted on me being. And that was when the real plan began. The strange thing about clarity is that it doesn't make you louder. It makes you quieter. And in that quiet, you begin to notice how predictable people become when they think they're manipulating you. After overhearing Mia's call, after hearing her confidently announce that I always sign, something inside me clicked into place with a soundless finality. I realized she wasn't a mastermind. She was simply arrogant. She believed in her plan because she believed I couldn't possibly step outside the version of me she had built in her head. Supportive, forgiving, generous, blind. So I let her keep believing it. The first phase of my plan wasn't dramatic. It was subtle. I became sweeter, more patient, more attentive. I gave her exactly the version of me she expected. When she said she needed space, I agreed gently. When she said the move was happening faster than expected, I nodded with a warm smile. When she brought up the business loan again, I asked careful questions in a tone that sounded more like cooperation than suspicion. And it worked. Her guard dropped completely. She grew smug in small ways. Not openly mocking, not cruel, just careless. Like someone convinced they had already won. One night at dinner, she casually mentioned, "You're just the best. I feel so supported knowing you're helping me step into my new chapter." Her new chapter. She didn't even pretend it was our chapter anymore. I smiled, held her hand across the table, and said, "I want you to feel secure during the transition. We'll handle everything together." She beamed. She believed. She had no idea. The next step was simple. I asked her to walk me through final paperwork for both her move and the business loan. I framed it as wanting to make sure we didn't miss anything important. This did two things. It reassured her that I was falling in line, and it encouraged her to move faster, thinking she needed to lock me in before I overthought anything. She brought me to her apartment the next morning, still pretending it was in chaos, still claiming she didn't want me to see the mess. When we walked in, I saw tiny traces of someone else already living there. A razor in the bathroom, a pair of socks tucked behind the laundry basket, a charger that wasn't hers plugged into the wall. She didn't even notice my eyes drift toward them. She was too focused on her performance. She sat me down on the couch, pulled out the loan package she had prepared, and this time, there was no hiding. My name was printed on every page. My financials were attached. My credit score had been pre-filled, taken from a photo she'd snapped the last time I'd shown her my banking app. She had built an entire financial blueprint, using my stability as the foundation for a future I would not be part of. But I didn't say a word. I leaned back, looked over the documents, and said, "Let's set a date to finalize everything. A day where both your coworker and I can be present, so we all understand the commitments." Her relief was immediate. She smiled so brightly I felt almost sad. She had absolutely no idea she was walking into the one place she feared most, a public truth. We scheduled the meeting for the following Friday, a transition meeting, as she called it. She said her coworkers were eager to celebrate her new business venture, and her soon-to-be roommate insisted on attending to show how supportive he was. Perfect. I spent the next few days preparing. Not confrontation, not anger, but undeniable clarity. I printed every screenshot. Her emails calling me a silent financial tool. Her draft messages saying I wouldn't notice details. Her description of me as useful but overly emotional. Her conversations with her coworker discussing how she needed to phase out the romance gracefully. I didn't add commentary. I didn't highlight anything. I wanted her words to speak for themselves. When Friday finally arrived, the atmosphere in the room was almost festive. We met in a glass conference room at her co-working space, a neutral location she claimed would feel professional. People laughed outside the door. Her manager waved. Her co-worker, the man she planned to move in with, stood next to her with a hand resting too comfortably on the back of her chair. She introduced me with a bright smile, as if she were proud of me. "This is my boyfriend. He's helping fund the business," she said lightly, as if she weren't referring to the man she was quietly replacing. I shook hands, polite, calm, in control. Then she slid the loan paperwork across the table toward me and said, with rehearsed sweetness, "Once you sign this, everything will fall into place." I looked at the document, then at her, then at him, and I gently placed a folder in the center of the table. "What's this?" she asked, her voice still floating with confidence. "Everything you've said about me," I replied softly. "Everything you've planned. Everything you didn't think I'd ever see." She laughed nervously. "What are you talking about?" So I opened the folder, slid out the first printed page, and placed it in front of her coworker. The email draft where she wrote, "He'll sign anything. I just have to make him feel needed." Her coworker's expression collapsed first, his face paling as he read. I slid the next page to her manager, an email where she said she only stayed in her current job to secure relationships useful for my business launch. Then another. Then another. Each page was a piece of the truth she'd buried under fake stress and speeches about independence. Mia's face changed slowly. First confusion, then panic, then a rising, frantic anger as she snatched through the pages, her voice tightening. "This is out of context. This is old. You're twisting." "No," I said calmly. "I'm not twisting anything. These are your words." Her coworker pulled his hand away from her chair. Her manager's expression hardened. Others in the room stopped talking as they sensed something unfolding behind the glass. Still calm, still steady, I slid the final page toward her. The email draft where she told him she was transitioning out of the relationship soon, and that I would finance the setup of our new living situation without realizing it. She froze. Completely. And in that silence, the perfect, heavy, public silence, her entire strategy crumbled. She whispered, "You weren't supposed to see any of that." And I replied, "I know." She reached for me, her voice cracking. "Please, let's talk about this privately." But it was too late. Her co-worker stood up abruptly. I didn't know, he muttered. I didn't sign up for this. He walked out, leaving her reaching after him in a silent, desperate gesture. Her manager looked at me apologetically and stepped out as well, murmuring something about needing to reevaluate her role. And right there, in the center of the glass room she wanted to use to celebrate her new beginning, she watched that beginning fall apart. Her face flushed red. Her hands shook. Her voice wavered as she said, "You ruined everything." I stood, gathering the folder. "No," I said quietly. "You did." Then I walked out, leaving her surrounded not by supporters, but by the shards of her own words. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt free. I didn't walk out of her apartment that day with anger buzzing in my chest. The strange thing was, I felt almost weightless, like the truth had snapped some rope I didn't realize had been pulling me underwater. I left her the spare key on the counter. No note, no dramatic exit, just the simple acknowledgement that I didn't belong in that space anymore. For the next few days, I didn't reach out, not because I wanted to prove a point, but because I finally understood there was nothing left to argue for. She, however, didn't seem to reach the same conclusion. For days after she'd taken her girls' weekend, my phone lit up with a text. Her. "We need to talk. Can you come over tonight?" Me. About what? Her. "Just come. Please." It was the please that got me. Soft, familiar, weaponized without her even realizing it. So I went. But I didn't go to fix anything. I went so I wouldn't have to keep replaying theoretical conversations in my head. I went for closure. Not for her, but for the version of me who once would have begged to understand. When she opened the door, she looked startled. Maybe because I didn't force a smile. Maybe because I looked rested. Maybe because something in me had quietly let her go days ago. "Can we sit?" she asked softly. I nodded. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, closer to strangers than partners. She fidgeted with the hem of her sweater. She always did that when she was about to lie, or about to convince herself she wasn't lying. "I'm sorry I've been so distant," she started. "I'm overwhelmed. I've been feeling lost, confused. I didn't want to hurt you." I let her talk, because sometimes the kindest thing you can offer someone is space to say what they need to believe. She continued, "I just needed time to think. I didn't want you to worry. That's why I said it was a girl's thing. I know that wasn't the best idea." I stayed quiet. She looked at me, waiting for reassurance I no longer had to give. "No one else stayed with you?" I asked calmly. No accusation, just a final fact check before the last page turned. She froze. That half-second of silence told me everything. It always does. "No," she finally said. "Too fast. Too stiff. Too practiced." I nodded, not because I believed her, but because I realized I didn't need her truth anymore. I had my own. "I didn't come here to argue," I said. "I came to tell you I'm done." Her face broke, confusion, panic, disbelief. "What? You're done? After one misunderstanding?" "One misunderstanding doesn't leave men's shoes by your bed," I said quietly. She went pale. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. I wasn't angry. I wasn't dramatic. I wasn't loud. I was simply finished. "I hope you find whoever you're choosing," I added. "And I hope they give you what you can't seem to accept from someone who actually tried." That was what made her crumble. Not the accusation, not the calmness, but the idea that I wasn't waiting around anymore. "I messed up," she whispered. "I know. I didn't think you'd actually leave." That line hit me harder than anything else she said, because it told me everything about how she valued me. She didn't think I would leave. She thought my love meant I'd tolerate anything. She thought respect was optional. She thought lying came with unlimited free passes. She thought she had time. But there's something quietly powerful about hitting your limit without theatrics. There's dignity in simply stepping away from someone who keeps playing games with things that matter to you. She reached for my hand. I stepped back. "Don't," I said softly. "Don't make this harder. Not for me. For you. She cried. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a soft, broken sound that felt like the opposite of healing. Like two people finally acknowledging they no longer fit. I headed for the door. She called my name once. I didn't turn around. Not out of coldness, but out of self-preservation. Some chapters deserve to end without a final glance. Healing wasn't immediate. People like to pretend leaving is the instant hard part. But sometimes it's the quiet evenings, the ones where your phone doesn't light up anymore, that teach you how much of yourself you lost trying to hold something together. But for the first time in months, my mind felt uncluttered. I picked up old hobbies. I reconnected with friends I'd been too drained to see. I learned how peaceful my own company could be when I wasn't anxious about someone else's shifting moods. One night, maybe a month later, she texted, "I'm sorry. For everything. I hope you're okay." I read the message. I took a breath. And I didn't reply. Because some closures don't come from conversations. They come from choosing silence over reopening wounds. I learned that space isn't something you beg for when you love someone. It's something you share. I learned that the right person doesn't disappear, hide, or rearrange the truth when things get heavy. I learned that peace isn't found in trying to fix someone else's uncertainty. It's found in finally choosing your own clarity. But most importantly, I learned that walking away quietly isn't weakness. It's strength in its cleanest form. And sometimes the softest exit is the one that closes the door the loudest.